right, today we will continue working our way through the judgments of Yehovah that follow after the giving of the 10 words or the 10 utterances. Remember, the judgments of Yehovah are connected to what righteousness looks like. It is righteousness from his perspective, or judgments from his perspective. We've already seen many things in Exodus 21 that presents a very different way of resolving and providing restitution than how our society is even structured today. Hopefully some of these principles being presented are getting you to realize that life could be much better if some of these things were actually applied in our society. And this is the correct perspective to have. And these will be our guiding principles that will govern our affairs in the millennium. It's good to keep that in mind as we're learning about these things, because this is what life will look like. Now this week we'll move into chapter 22. Yehovah's judgments continue in this chapter, and they'll continue on even in 23. But today we'll consider different issues that come up regarding property. Some dealing with stealing, some principles dealing with negligence. And we'll again find principles that can easily be applied to areas of our lives even today. Maybe we'll not see them in society, but they're principles that can be applied in our homes and even in our assembly. So let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity we have today to come again and to consider the truths of your word. Father, I thank you have the ability to meet with you, that you set aside your appointed times where your people can gather around you and learn what they need to about who you are and how you expect them to live. Father, thank you for giving us revelation, the ability of us to discern right and wrong, righteous living, and what unrighteousness looks like. Father, I pray that we gain an understanding as we focus on your judgments, particularly here today as we continue to work through Exodus, and particularly Exodus 22. Pray you bless our efforts, and pray all this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right, Exodus 22, we're going to, Lord willing, we're going to cover the first 15 verses today. So verse 1, Exodus 22. It says, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it, or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox, and 4 sheep for a sheep. Now, as we move into Exodus 22, we see more judgments that deal with property rights. We've already seen some issues with property rights in the previous chapter in regards to, for example, an ox being killed by another ox. We saw how both owners shared in the loss of the one that was killed or harmed, and the other animal was not known to push in times past. But if the ox was known to push in the past, and the owner knew of it, then the owner of that troublesome ox bore the responsibility for the trouble that his animal created. Those things had to do with property rights. Also, we saw a judgment regarding someone that loses an animal by falling into an uncovered pit. Again, property rights. So here in Exodus 22 and verse 1, we see another property rights issue. Someone stealing an animal. Stealing is connected with property rights because someone owns something, has possession of something, and someone else steps in and desires to take that. So if someone steals an animal from another person, we see that if the thief has either killed the animal that was stolen or has sold the animal that was stolen. In other words, the stolen animal is no longer able to be returned in the condition it was stolen in. It's either dead or just plain gone. That's what scenario is being discussed here. This results in a severe consequence. So let me read verse 1. It says, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, in other words, he can't produce it anymore, it's gone, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So we have severe consequences if the thief cannot produce that which he stole or is not in the same condition of it. The consequence is, if it was an ox, the thief needs to give the original owner 5 oxen back. But if it was a sheep or some sort of flock animal, that's what this word behind sheep is a flock animal, so it could be goats, the thief needs to give the original owner 4 sheep or 4 goats. That's the idea. Now this at first appears to be very random and likely a very difficult principle to apply. So you're looking at this and going, okay, well, sometimes it's 4 and sometimes it's 5. because it seems to be all about ox and sheep. And there does not seem to be a reason for the different restitutions provided. However, the answer to what's going on here is not difficult if you think about it for a moment. What is the primary difference between an ox and a sheep? Outside, they are in fact completely different animals. Size. Yeah, that's a good observation. If someone wanted to trade you a perfectly healthy, fully grown sheep for your fully healthy grown ox, so you own an ox and I have a sheep, and I want to trade you. Mine's fully grown sheep, you have a fully grown ox. Would you make that trade? I see some head shaking no. And the answer is, of course not. You would make that trade. Why? Because a fully grown ox, with nothing wrong with it, is worth more than a fully grown sheep in the same condition. So in other words, there's a value difference here. Understanding this, now let's go back to verse 1. It says, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. What this is saying is that a lesser valued item requires restitution of 4 times if the thief sold or killed it. However, a higher valued item requires restitution of 5 times its value if the thief sold it or killed it. Now, isn't this an interesting principle? The higher the value of the item that was stolen and subsequently killed or sold is result in a steeper penalty upon the thief. That's what it's trying to say here, is that a higher value item requires a harsher penalty. It's like a compounding factor here. What is this designed to do? Well, the answer is, first of all, discourage stealing because the penalty is high. If you stole something and you either sold that item you stole, or you destroyed that item that you stole, and you had to pay 4 times back or 5 times back, either way, that's a lot of a provision, a consequence to have to pay. So part of this is to discourage someone from stealing. Because having to restore something 4 times is a big deal. Second of all, it discourages even more so thievery of higher valued items. In other words, the larger the theft, the worse it is for the thief. So you think of like a multiplier effect. It gets worse for them. Now you might be saying, well, how do I apply this? I don't have sheep or oxen. Let's take a quick look at Luke chapter 19. It's the Gospel of Luke chapter 19. We've seen an individual applying the principle from Exodus 22:1. We have it in Luke 19:8. Read this verse. It says, and Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. So here, the converted Zacchaeus, who is the tax collector, who is now a Yeshua follower, he knew how to apply Exodus 22:1 correctly. And so the value of what he stole as a tax collector would have been on the lesser side. And so it was a 4-fold restitution rather than a 5-fold restitution. And so it seems that for small or medium types of thievery, it requires a 4 times response or restitution. And for items on the more significant side, it requires a 5 times restitution. Obviously, there's judgment involved here, but it helps provide some parameters involved. And so I think it's an interesting concept to think about back in Exodus 22, that if you steal one thing of a lesser value and you don't have it in your possession anymore, you've got to give 4 times back. But if it's a higher value item, not only is it like the 4 times 4, it's an additional piece of it because it's even more valuable. In other words, it should cause the thief to pause even more so to say, wait a second, if I get caught with this issue, it's going to be worse for me. And so there is escalating consequences for the greater the crime. Moving on to verse 2 of Exodus 22. If a thief be found breaking up, and be smitten that he die, there should be no blood shed for him. Verse 3 says, if the sun be risen upon him, there should be blood shed for him, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. It's helpful to look at verse 2 and 3 together when trying to understand what's being said here. Verse 2 says, the thief has been found breaking up. The Hebrew behind this phrase breaking up means, in our current language, to be found breaking in, or breaking an entry, or caught in the act of burglary. That's what the idea of breaking up means, like burglary. In other words, the thief is discovered because something made a noise, like something crashing and falling on the ground or something, or the owner happens to come upon the person in their act. In other words, a person's not where they're supposed to be, and they're doing something that is suspicious or whatever it might be. And that's what it means by the thief being found breaking up. However, although the reality is that someone is stealing something here. So verse 2 says, if a thief be found breaking up. So here we see in the text that it says thief. So this is the reality of a thief is found breaking up. So this is the reality of what's going on. But what's being said by verse 2 is the owner does not know the exact situation. And we can see this from verse 3 when it says, if the sun be risen. So take a look at verse 3 there. It says, there's a really continuation. It says, though, if the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him. There's a contrast between verse 2 and 3. In other words, in verse 2, the stealing is happening when the sun is not risen. What does that mean? It's like nighttime, where it's dark, when there's no light to see. In other words, the owner that finds this thief or this person breaking in, committing burglary, or doing something at nighttime, the owner doesn't know all the facts that's going on. He doesn't know that it's just a thief. And I want to say just a thief, because he doesn't understand what is going on and why someone is breaking into his house in the middle of the night. So verse 2 provides a scenario where the thief is breaking in at nighttime, and the owner discovers the thief breaking in. But because it's dark, it is possible the thief's intentions are not known. In other words, is the person that's breaking in there for the purpose of stealing something? Or are they there for the purpose of harming someone? I mean, think about that. If someone broke into your house, you don't know what's going on. Are they trying to hurt somebody? Are they trying to, do some sort of wrongful thing against another gender, for example? Like rape or something like that? Are they trying to do something else? Well, we don't know what's going on, why someone's breaking in the middle of the night. Or are they simply trying to steal something? Depending on the situation, it might not be possible to know. And that's what this is trying to say here. And so in verse 2, it says that something happens where the owner hurts the thief that he dies. Again, verse 2. If a thief be found breaking up, or breaking in, or kind of coming where he's not supposed to be, and be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. So in other words, something happens where the person breaking in is hit and he dies. The verse says is that no blood shall be shed for him. In other words, no blood or capital offense should be considered because the thief was hit and died. In other words, the owner that killed the thief breaking in does not face capital punishment. That's what this is trying to say. Now remember, before we saw in Exodus 21, if two men are fighting and one kills the other, what happens there? Well, the one that kills the other when they're fighting, what is his consequence? Death. Capital punishment. The one that killed the other is also put to death. Now what's being described here in Exodus 22 is referring to how someone breaks in and a fight occurs. Or the owner takes an object and smashes it on the head of the thief. The classic flower pot and top, right? Something like that. And as a result of that, the thief dies. The owner is not responsible here for the death of the thief. However, moving on to verse 3, kind of becomes more clear. Verse 3 says the facts are different. It says, if the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him. So here the facts are different. Now when the thief is found or discovered to be breaking in, still a thief, But now the sun is shining. It's not nighttime. Rather, the sun is out. And what does this mean? It means the owner can make a better informed decision about what's going on. He can see all the facts before him. He can see the person is not there with a knife going over the head, right? Trying to kill somebody. He can see he's trying to take something. And in that case there, the owner needs to understand, I can't take the life of this guy because I can tell he's just trying to steal something. In daylight, it's clear the thief is there to steal and not to harm necessarily. And so in this case, the owner does not have the right to kill the burglar. And if the owner does kill the thief, well, then the owner will have his blood shed as a consequence for taking the burglar's life. So again, verse 3. If the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed. There shall be blood shed for him. And so again, this is built off of verse 2 when it says, if a thief be found breaking up and be smitten that he die. So the idea is that he is hit and dies. Well, in the case that it's dark out, no blood shall be shed for him. But in case it's light, and the owner has facts in front of him, and she'll be able to discern that it's only a break-in for stealing something, well, then he can't kill him, or his life will be taken. Now, this is a different mindset than what exists among a lot of our society and was taught. Because what is the issue here? Is that the text is making it clear that someone should not die for stealing something. You should not kill someone for threatening to take something of yours. That's not a life or death matter. That's what the Bible says. In other words, you cannot defend your things by killing someone. Today we have like castle laws, right? Some states. Where if you kill someone for trespassing on your property, invading your space, you could potentially kill them. The Bible says no. You don't have the right for doing that. If your life is in danger, that is a different story. And that's one of the implied things from verse 2, is because a person could be defending your life and you accidentally kill a person versus someone just trying to steal something from you. So there's a lot of facts to be keeping in mind here. But you cannot defend your things by killing someone. So keep in mind, even if you live somewhere where the home castle laws applies to you, or applies to potentially the situation, you do not have the right as a believer to take life in this situation. This is the biblical view and how to handle things. And if you do, don't be surprised if God then judges you in some other regard. And so if you know it's only about defending your property, you don't have the right to take someone's life. And why is this? Because, as it says at the end of verse 3, or towards the end here, it says, if the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him, for he shall make full restitution. Well, who is the he here? It's talking about the burglar. It's like if you take his life, he won't make full restitution. The burglar has a responsibility to make full payment for what the crime he's committed, but the restitution is not bloodshed. And so what is that restitution? Well, we saw two scenarios in verse 1. It says that if a thief be found and he kill or has sold an oxen or a sheep, well, then it's a fourfold or a fivefold type of restitution. And so you could have a scenario of where a thief breaks in and he's looking to take something and he kills an animal in the process. Well, that could require a fourfold or a fivefold restitution. And so we see the parameters there. And at the end of verse 3 clarifies, take a look at verse 3 again, it says, if he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. So in other words, if a thief cannot make full restitution, he's going to go into servitude. This is where we looked earlier when we were covering certain topics in chapter 21. So the thief does not have the means to make full restitution. He's to be sold into bondage so that he can work off the debt that he owes. But what happens if the thief has not destroyed that item that he stole or hasn't sold it? Especially in the case where we have in verse 3 where if a thief is found breaking up, he hasn't had a chance to sell it yet. Maybe destroy it or kill it, that's possible. But what happens if it's still there? He hasn't killed it or hasn't destroyed it, hasn't sold it yet. What if it's just found in his possession? In other words, caught red-handed. Well, verse 4 covers that. It says, if the thief be certainly found in, if the theft be certainly found in his hand alive, whether it be ox or ass or sheep, he shall restore double. Now you can think of the idea of alive, of course, related to an animal, but it could also be in the sense of like undamaged, unharmed. So here we see, if the thief is found with the stolen merchandise in his possession, well, the restitution is not fourfold, it's not fivefold, it's rather double, or twice, is what this means. It's twice the value. In other words, if someone stole a sheep that's worth $400, then the thief would have to return the sheep and another sheep that's worth the same amount, or it could be $400. So it could be a sheep and $400. So in other words, it's returning the very thing that was stolen, not some sort of replacement, but that item plus the value of that item, or equivalent of that item. The key here is the thief still has stolen the goods and has them in his possession. So here we have a modified example of eye for eye and tooth for tooth, in a way. Is that the crime consequence is connected to the value of what was hurt or attempted to be hurt. But in this case here, it's not just a returning of the item to say, well, here's your eye back. Here's your tooth back. What this is here's your tooth back and another tooth the same value. So it's the same kind of concept, but it's modified. The owner of the stolen goods is, of course, restored to their previous condition, plus they're given the same value of what was taken for the experience, if you will. Now, you might think, well, how is this fair? I mean, after all, the thief doesn't just restore, he doubly restores. How is that fair? But you see, what is being done here is setting up a system that deters deters and has steep consequences for stealing. Because think of it this way. If all the thief has to do is restore the owner to their previous condition, all they need to do is restore their owner to their previous condition, what is the true consequence to the thief? You'd be like, oh, well, let me go steal this today. Oh, I got caught. Oh, here, just have it back. Oh, I'll go try to steal this tomorrow. Oh, I got caught. I'll just give it back. And then the next day, I'll go steal this. Ooh, no one caught me this time. There's no consequence because all you have to do is just restore the person. But if you have to restore them double, all of a sudden, it's a returning of the item plus the value of the item. So you see here how this is meant to be a deterrent and a consequence at the same time. And so Yehovah set this up so there is a true consequence here and actually deters the idea of stealing. So it's not just about restoring or restitution. It's actually about having a consequence attached to it as well. There has to be a fair consequence. So it's not a matter of where you steal a sheep and you've got to give back a sheep and an oxen. It's the value of what you did is what the penalty is associated with it. So you start thinking about this, it makes a lot of sense. So the fair consequence is the exact value of what's been stolen. So for a small offense, if it's still in your possession, you'd have a small consequence. But a larger offense would have a larger consequence. So if you stole a pen, you don't have to pay back a car value. If you steal a pen, you give the pen back and the value of another pen. So you see here how the application here becomes much more readily apparent. And it restores the person rightfully, and the thief has a fair consequence associated with it. However, if the thief has damaged it, if the thief has sold it, well then, the owner does not get a stolen item back. Rather, the owner gets 4 times or a 5 times consequence returned back to him. And so we see here, it's almost like if the thief takes the next step and does something with that, commits another double offense here. So in a way, it's like not only have they stolen it, they've now benefited from it from selling it somehow or something, taking it and moving it to another person, or removing the life altogether. Well, there's another consequence that ramps up the whole process. All right, so moving on to verse 5. If a man shall cause a field or a vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed in another man's field, of the best of his own field, and of the best of his own vineyard, shall he make restitution. So here is a scenario that causes another person's property to be taken out of what could have been a few different scenarios. It could have been pure negligence. So maybe somehow your animal like wandered into, or you kind of allowed your animal to wander into another person's field or vineyard, and the animal eats of that field or vineyard. Or possible is willful negligence. Purposely left the gate open so they can wander over there, right? The animal made it out of there again. That corn looks way too much better than this stuff here sitting in the pen, right? Or possibly you're willingly benefiting from someone else's situation. So in other words, you actually lead your animal over to the field. That's what it almost kind of sounds like here, is this latter piece of it. When we read verse 5, it says, if a man shall cause a field or vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed in another man's field. So this kind of sounds like it's a latter piece, like almost like he led his animal over there. But there could be a multitude of scenarios that comes from this. Like I said, there could be pure negligence, it could be willful negligence, or purposeful kind of type of a thing where you're putting something in a situation. But what's going on here? Someone is willingly benefiting from someone else's situation. There's a benefit. And so it may not have totally wrecked the field. It may have just like a partial like marring, just like a few ears here or there of corn or some wheat or whatever it might be. A bunch of grapes are taken, whatever the situation. But we see here someone else is benefiting from someone else's situation. In this case here, agriculture. You got a field and someone. So it's kind of like, for all of a sudden, like someone came in, they took a few ears of corn out of the farmer's field. Have you severely harmed the farmer? Probably not a whole lot. But we're starting to start moving this idea of stealing here a little bit, right? And so the reality what's unfolded is that someone has benefited from someone else's property without permission. There's no permission going on here. It's not a matter of where the neighbor goes, hey, my animals are really hungry and I'm kind of a little light on food. I haven't got a chance to go back and get some more. Would you mind if, I let my animal kind of graze a little bit in your field? That's not what's going on here. There's no asking of permission. You're just doing it. There's no asking. There's no payment that's being made here. And so this is in some form, a form of stealing, although maybe a later form of it. It's like taking a pen home from work. Oh, oops, I accidentally took another pen. Type of thing. Or letting your kid eat some grapes without paying for them at the grocery store. You ever seen this where mom's has kids in tow and the kid takes some grapes and puts it in her mouth? Well, mom's not going to go pay for those necessarily. Even if she takes that bag and pays, she's paying by the pound. Hasn't paid for those grapes that are in the stomach of her child. Well, that's kind of the same idea. Her kid just grazed from the grocery store there. And so it's all kind of a form of this. You're benefiting from at someone else's expense. Is what you're doing. Someone else's property. The reality of the situation is that someone is wrongfully benefiting from someone else's situation. So what's the consequence when this is found? Well, the answer is the one guilty of doing this needs to make restitution with one of the best of his own field. So again, go back to verse 5. If a man shall cause a field or a vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed in another man's field, and here's the consequence, of the best of his own field and of the best of his own vineyard shall he make restitution. And so the one guilty of doing this needs to make restitution with the best of his own. Now notice it does not say that the best of the field's owner was taken. It doesn't say, well, in the beginning of the verse, that the animals that were let in ate of the best of that owner's field. No, they just ate of the field. But what's the consequence? Well, you've got to return the best of yours of the related category for to replace what they lost. Your best for what they lost. And so it's not necessarily equal value here. It could be, but what this almost does is it gives the benefit of the doubt of what the person lost was the best. And so the consequence, it has to be replaced with the best of the same type of that item. In other words, there's not an assessment to be made of what is taken. So it's like, wait a second, let's take a look at the other portion of the field here, right around this area. Yeah, this corn looks a little bit, a little mangled. So let me give you some mangly corn back. Because your animal, my animal only ate some, lesser quality of your produce here. But that's not what it's saying here. So realize how the wording is presented. Something needs to be replaced with the best of what was taken. So the reason is because in many cases it's not possible to know how good the quality was. But even if you could, that's not what's being said here. Either way, the best of what is owned of that same thing is what is to be replaced. And so we can see how judges would likely need to get involved in scenarios where one that took another from another does not even have a comparable thing. So maybe what happened is that your animal got into their vineyard. Well, you don't have a vineyard. Maybe you don't even have a field of any sort. Well, how do you need to now replace that item with the best in that category? So they might need to buy that comparable thing so that restitution can be made. But it would need to be new and of a high quality. Obviously, again, there's judgment has to be made here. So for example, like if somehow something was destroyed and then there's like something at a way higher value. So sometimes there needs to be, I think, some judgment here. But it's talking about you need to give a high quality item in return. You can't just go, I guess I got into your field and let me give you some mangly corn just as a replacement. So it's like a fair trade in the one person's eyes, but obviously not in the person that was damaged. So we see this idea of a higher quality or the best quality being replaced when someone takes something like that. All right, kind of a similar idea. There's some carryover here. Moving to verse 6. It says, if fire break out and catch in thorns, so that the stacks of corn or the standing corn or the field be consumed, wherewith he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So here we see another scenario where someone's property has been impacted by another person. Not necessarily stealing in this case. Because obviously the person that had this fire breakout wasn't trying to have a fire breakout. He didn't benefit from the other person's field or standing corn. The idea of like they have their harvest in like some bins and their bins catch on fire and their other harvest is destroyed. And so the person didn't necessarily benefit, but another person was impacted by it. And so we just saw an example where one's animals got into another field or vineyard. So here, this sounds like pure negligence to keep a fire under control. In this scenario, someone has lit a fire, and then fire inadvertently spreads into some thorns, which spreads quickly into someone's field or harvest area and destroys their produce or their ability to bring forth a crop. So here, the person that failed to keep the fire under control is responsible to make restitution to the owner of the field. And so all we have here at the end of verse 6, it says, he that kindleth the fire or lit the fire shall surely make restitution. Well, what's the restitution? Does it say? Well, the answer comes from the previous verse. The person that kindled the fire would need to restore the owner with the field with the same amount that was lost with the best of his. That's what would be implied. So, like, for example, I just accidentally destroyed your whole field. Well, I have a mangly field over here. I'll just give you that one. Let you have the produce from that one. No, it talks about the best of what's supposed to be restored. So now why is this not double restitution? Or a 4 times restitution? Or a 5-fold restitution? Well, the answer is because this is connected to negligence. It's not connected to thievery, but it's connected to something that someone should have controlled or had under control. When you light a fire, you got to be careful. It's kind of about, so that's the whole thing, is that you need to make sure you keep things under control. And so this isn't only about fires, isn't only about fields. It's about a lot of things that can get out of control, that are in your control. And so if something like that happens, and so this is similar to an idea of an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, but it carries in the idea of is when you have an offense that happens, that you need to make sure that you're replacing it with the best. And so here the contextual flow from verse 5, it seems like flows into verse 6. Moving on to verse 7. If a man shall deliver unto his neighbor money or stuff to keep, and it be stolen out of the man's house, if the thief be found, let him pay double. So here is yet another scenario. In this case, someone is providing safekeeping for another person's things, like a trustee in today's legal terminology. They're a trustee, so they're safekeeping of someone's stuff. And in this scenario, if while the person is keeping care over that item, it is stolen. So someone steals that thing. So here in verse 7 is talking about money or stuff. And so here, if it's stolen, it says here, if the thief is found, the thief is to pay double. So again, read that verse. So sometimes you might read that too quickly and think, well, the person that had the item that was a trustee or was holding it, you might wrongly think initially that that person that had it stolen is to pay double. No, it's referring to the thief. So again, verse 7, if a man shall deliver unto his neighbor money or stuff to keep, and it be stolen out of the man's house, if the thief be found, let him, that be the thief, pay double. Well, why would that be the case? Well, this is in line with the scenario from verse 4, where if the thief is in possession of the goods he stole, he doesn't pay 4 times or 5 times, he pays double. That's what it's referring to. So in other words, if you ask me to hold something for you, and someone stole it, we found the thief, well, I'm not responsible for that. The thief is responsible for paying the restitution. If the thief committed the crime, that thief pays the restitution. Consequently, the thief needs to make the restitution. By the way, here is evidence that there are meant to be principles applied here. Because back in verse 4, it was dealing with oxen, donkeys, and sheep. Here is connected to money or stuff. So same consequences, different items. And so here we can start seeing that there's an expectation that principles are expected to be applied. However, verse 8 continues on with the same scenario, but just different fact pattern. It says in verse 8, if the thief be not found, then the master of the house shall be brought unto the judges to see whether he hath put his hand unto his neighbor's goods. So, here is a scenario where you ask me to hold something for you, some money, and you come back and come get it, and you're like, well, yes, someone stole it. I'm sorry. Someone took it. Then you'd be like, well, let's go find the thief. You're like, well, I have no idea. We can't find anybody. It's not anywhere. So in that case there, you and I would go before the judges. And then I would state my testimony before the judges. The judges would determine, well, did I take it and lie about it? Or did really a true theft happen? And so read this verse again, verse 8. If the thief be not found, then the master of the house, that be the trustee, shall be brought unto the judges to see whether he hath put his hand unto his neighbor's goods. Full stop. This is where the verse ends. So the thief cannot be found. In this situation, the master of the house, the one that's supposed to keep the things in safekeeping, they stand before the judges. When he stands before the judges, he gives testimony to the situation. What is presumed in the case that's given here is the master of the house claims he did not personally steal the items. If the judges determine that he's lying, well, then the master of the house would pay the restitution consistent with what has already been presented in the chapter. In other words, if he doesn't have the goods anymore, what would be the consequence? Well, I would say it'd be 4 times or 5 times, potentially. Because he doesn't have the goods anymore, because he's basically saying he doesn't have it. If the stuff cannot be presented, he'd pay 4 or 5 times the situation. However, if the judges determine that his testimony is he did not steal the stuff, and that testimony is true, what's implied with the silence of the text is that nothing happens to the master of the house, and no restitution is made to the owner of the stuff that was lost. So in other words, the judge is like, okay, yeah, Mark, you were supposed to keep it. Someone came and stole it, but you didn't steal it. Well, then I guess that's just a situation. So what's going on here? Well, the answer is the same result as if the stuff were stolen from the owner's house itself. So you entrusted me. Well, what happens if you never entrusted me and you yourself had it in your house and someone stole it from your house? Well, if you can find the thief, well, then restitution can be made. However, if the thief can't be made, what happens? Nothing. So in other words, sometimes things happen to you just like they can happen to me. And if you can prove that the same scenario happened to you and you didn't have anything to do with it, like you weren't like willfully negligent, like, you didn't put out in your front porch, for the taking, here's an animal, here's some stuff, here's some money, just leaving it sitting out there, and someone walks by and goes, ooh, that's kind of nice, and grabs it, right? That's different than what, hey, I put it in the back room, it was underneath in some safekeeping spot, nobody knows that I was holding this for you. That's different. That could have happened to you if you're hiding money under your mattress and it got stolen, right? And they don't find the thief. All they know is someone broke in, there's a broken window, and the stuff's gone, right? Nothing you can do about it. And so that's what's kind of being said here. And so it seems to be implied here, as long as the master of the house can show that he took reasonable care to safeguard, then he is in the same situation as if the owner had the theft happen on his own watch or his own property. So that's what seems to be said here. Verse 9. It says, for all manner of trespasses, whether it be for ox, for ass, for sheep, for raiment, or for any manner of lost thing, which another challengeth to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whom the judges shall condemn, he shall pay double unto his neighbor. And so here, in this case here, it would seem to imply that in all situations, whether it's a living thing or an unliving thing, there is if a person was responsible for it and he didn't steal it, well, then there's a double payment for it. So what this seems to imply is that maybe even in this case of where a thief broke in and there's willful negligence involved, well, then in that case, the person that was keeping safekeeping would pay double the situation. So that's what seems to be the case here, is that you had your hand involved in this offense somehow, or for any other offense. Well, the consequence of this is a double payment. So this is like a very broad-reaching statement that we have here, a principle that can be applied to a number of different situations. And so the Bible is doing here is not saying this is the exact fact pattern for every single thing, and that as long as this item was presented, and it doesn't matter if anything else was presented, then this is the result of it. And so what needs to happen is you say, okay, well, guys, this fact and this fact and this fact, and so maybe all these things add up to a fourfold thing. Or maybe all these things add up to is just a double piece of it. So even if it's stolen, but you had to put your hand in it somehow to not safeguard it, well then that case means it's a double piece of it. So this is a far-reaching principle. This is in some regards, in many ways I would say, very similar to what we saw in the last chapter with eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. A fair, just, equitable response to something that happens. Here, if there is something that caused an offense, something wrong was done, whatever the subject matter of that item is, the consequence is double the value of that. And so you can think about it, for example, in the situation of where someone makes an accusation against you. Well, if that accusation is proven to be correct, well, then you are restored as the accuser double of what that item was that was accused of. But the inverse is also true. Let's say I accuse you of stealing my stuff, and it's just a wrong accusation. Well, then if I wrongly accused, well, then you get double, and I have to pay double. So you see, so that's what's kind of being said here is that if there's a matter or an offense between two different people, whoever is determined to be wrong, that person pays double. So again, verse 9, for all manner of trespass, whether it be for ox, for ass, for sheep, for raiment, or for any manner of lost thing, which another challengeth to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whom the judges shall condemn, he shall pay double unto his neighbor. So a lot of application with these verses in here. Verse 10, if a man deliver unto his neighbor an ass or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep, and it die or be hurt, or driven away, no man seeing it. Then shall an oath of the Lord be between them both, that he hath not put his hand unto his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept thereof, and he shall not make it good. So here is yet another example with animals, and another is asked to keep watch or care over them. Now something is different about what we have here described here and what we saw back in verse 7. And that is we're dealing with something alive, living, a living animal here. And some understand a significant difference is that one keeping care of the owner of the animal has the ability to benefit from the animal itself. And so the idea is if you're holding on to someone's money or you're holding on to someone's stuff, well, you're just holding on to it. However, if you're holding on to someone's animal, it's alive. And you theoretically get to benefit from it. So maybe if it's an ox, you can help it plow your field. Or if you have like a goat or a sheep, you get some milk out of it or something like that. So some sort of benefit that you can receive by keeping it. And so that's kind of the view here, is that there's a different value in what you're holding and the ability you have to benefit from it. And so in this scenario, something bad happens to the animal. It says in the verse, it dies. It gets hurt. It potentially runs away. And so that's what is being said here in verse 10. It says, and it die or be hurt or driven away, no man seeing it. And so in other words, it dies, it gets hurt or runs away. However, as the end of verse 10 indicates, no man seeing it. In other words, no one saw how it got hurt. No one saw how it died. No one saw how it ran away or something like that. Or by the time they saw it running away, it was too late. But it wasn't like this idea of someone purposely drove it away type of thing. In this case, as verse 11 indicates, an oath is made between Yehovah that there is no foul play involved. So in other words, they make an oath before God to say the person that was supposed to be keeping care of the animal and says, no, I didn't cause anything to happen to make it die. I didn't do anything to make it get hurt. I didn't do anything, or it just ran away. It was just standing there 1 minute, and all of a sudden I looked back, it just ran away. And so that's what this situation here is. In this case, the owner of that animal, who was entrusting the other person who under their watch had this happen, it says that owner needs to accept the facts for what they are. It has happened. And no restitution's made. So what's being said here is that these same things could have happened just as easily to the owner and under the owner's care and under their watch as when the person was watching the animal itself. And so the key here is understanding at the end of verse 10 when it says no man seeing it, or there's no reason to understand that it was the one that was keeping watch's fault. It's like a natural thing that happened. However, then we see the different situations in verse 12. Verse 12, it says here, and if it be stolen from him, he shall make restitution unto the owner thereof. See, here we have a similar situation as verse 7 and 8. What happened in 7 and 8? 7 and 8 was dealing, though, with money or stuff. Here it's with a living animal. What's implying is that if the thief is found, the thief would pay the required restitution here. So even though it's not said. But if the thief is not found, so in other words, the person that's watching this said, the owner comes back and says, yeah, sorry, it was stolen. Your donkey that you left with me, stolen. So we see here in verse 12, the one keeping the animal is to make restitution, even though the reality is that the animal was stolen. So what's the difference here between the animal and stuff? Well, it seems it's connected to the animal. Possibly two different things here. One, because it could have been because the keeper benefited from the animal. And so that because the person benefited from the animal, there's more of a price to pay for it. That's one possibility. Another possibility is because it's the difference between life and non-life, a living thing and a non-living thing. And then when one keeps or is entrusted with life, more diligence is required. This one I'm not completely sure on, and I could not find a whole lot on this difference between these different pieces here. So, but there's definitely a difference between a living thing and a non-living thing. either it's because someone benefited from it or there's more diligence involved. But there is a difference here between a living thing and a non-living thing. Verse 13. It says, if it be torn in pieces, then let him bring it for witness, and he shall not make good that which was torn. So here, related to the same situation, in fact, slightly different again. One is asked to keep watch over an animal. But in this case, it's found that the animal was attacked by another animal. Here, the trustee of the animal does not have to make restitution, as long as the torn animal or mangled animal can be shown or proven. Say, see here. And so that's usually the case, is if some sort of predator comes in, doesn't take the whole animal, usually there's evidence left behind to say, yeah, you can clearly see that something attacked this thing. And so the trustee of the animal does not have to make full restitution. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between an animal that is lost to theft to being lost to another animal, but we see here the text makes a difference to the two. So it's almost like you should be safeguarding it in a way that someone can't steal it. But like I said, I'm not sure the difference between an animal breaking in and tearing it to pieces. So the text makes the distinction. All right, 2 more verses here and we'll be done. Verse 14. It says that if a man borrow aught of his neighbor, and it be hurt or die, the owner thereof being not with it, he shall surely make it good. But if the owner thereof be with it, he shall not make it good. If it be a hired thing, it came for his hire. So here we see, when we end with these 2 verses, we have 3 different scenarios for borrowed property. So this is borrowed property. This is not in the situation of where, hey, I'll watch that for you. This is, can I use that? Can you borrow that item to me so I can use it? The first scenario is where the person who borrowed the animal does something where the animal gets hurt or the animal dies. The scenario specifically calls out that the animal's owner is not there. In other words, the one that borrowed the animal is in complete control of the situation. So you say, I'm the one that wants to borrow an animal. So I'm like, hey, you mind if I borrow your animal? You're like, sure, I'll let you borrow my animal. But I'll deliver in the morning, and then I have some other things to do. And so then I use your animal for whatever purpose it might be, and during that process, the animal gets hurt or dies. In that case, the consequence that I have, because I was in complete control of the situation, is I'm fully responsible for what's going on. And if something happens, the one that borrowed the animal to use it has to make full restitution to make good what happened. So if the animal gets hurt, well, you got to help make that animal get better. Pay for the medical care, whatever it might be. If the animal dies, well, then you now need to replace that animal with a like animal. In other words, they have to replace the animal. In the second scenario, the facts are the same. I'm borrowing the animal, except the animal's owner is present, so you're there with me. You're like, sure, I'll let you borrow my donkey to use it, pull some things around. But I'll be there and kind of help you out as well. Well, in this case, if something happens to the animal gets hurt, or the animal dies, well, then the owner receives no restitution. What's the difference here? Well, if you're there with me, with your animal, you now have the ability to say, wait a second, you can't put 300 pounds on top of that sheep. You're going to kill that thing, right? Or you can't run that animal that hard without giving it water. It's going to get hurt. So the owner has the ability to step in and say, whoa, stop. I let you borrow the animal, not torture the animal. That's not what we're here for. And so if the owner doesn't step in and allows the situation to proceed and the animal gets hurt, well, then now it's the owner's responsibility because the owner gave blessing to do that. So that's what's being said here. So it's not giving all the facts in the whole scenario. So maybe it's a matter where the owner says, you can't do that, and the person borrowing says, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyways. Well, that's not what's being described here. So don't try to find some sort of way to wiggle through this and say this doesn't make sense. Because it's trying to give you the basic high-level understanding of what would be the scenario. If you're there, you have the ability to control it and make sure something doesn't happen to your animal. And so the owner is still in charge of the use of his property that way. But then we have a third scenario at the end of verse 15. Verse 15 says, It says, if it be a hired thing, it came for his hire. So here's the third scenario. In this case, the animal was hired out. Who knows what that means? Hired out. Yeah, so paid for. So in other words, it's not a matter of saying, hey, John, you mind if I borrow your donkey to use it? And John's like, yeah, sure, you go borrow it. You're not paying anything, right? You're just using it. However, if I say, hey, John, I'll pay you $50 to use your donkey for a couple hours. You okay with that? Now you're hiring it out. You're paying to that for the use of the animal. It's like leasing it, paying like a rent payment in a way. In this case, if something happens to the animal, no restitution is made because payment was already made for it. So in other words, as long as you're using it for the purpose you're paying for, well then the owner takes risk in allowing you to use the animal because you're receiving payment. They've already received compensation for that purpose. And if they didn't charge enough for that purpose of it, well then that's their problem. Now at first, these three can be a little confusing. Why are the differences? But you think about the case of borrowing a car. If you borrow a car from your neighbor, and the neighbor's not there while you're using it, and somehow you get a flat tire, do you go back to your neighbor and you go, oh, yeah, you know what? I got a flat tire. Too bad. Well, if you borrowed out your car and you're not there and they have to come back with a flat tire, well, they're going to be like, well, yeah, you must have drove over something. You gotta take care of that repair yourself. However, if you borrow your neighbor's car, your neighbor goes with you, and then all of a sudden something happens, and something breaks down, the neighbor can clearly see the owner of the car. You didn't do anything wrong. Something just happened. Well, in that case there, it's the owner's responsibility because they can see nothing was negligence and happening, type of thing. And so you can see here how the difference of scenarios. However, under the third scenario, when you rent a car from a rental company, if the car breaks down, the rental company doesn't go, oh, too bad, you got to fix my car. No, you paid for the rental company, and that's usually why you rent a car, is if it breaks down on a trip, the rental company is responsible for giving you a different car that works, right? So that's how this all the same kind of thing. So we have a lot of these principles do exist in these scenarios being listed and how we operate today. And so hopefully this makes sense to you. So God's laid out these things here, and there's a lot of common sense involved as well, but it's laid out so someone can go, wait a second, I think this is the fair thing. No, Scripture lays out, this is the principles you be applying. So this is a place to stop because verse 16 moves into some different types of judgments that are not dealing with property. So Lord willing, we'll pick it up in verse 16 next week. Let's go ahead and let's pray. Heavenly Father,